Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today we're going to answer another question from one of our viewers, which is concerning which type of U.S. company is most appropriate for which situations. If you haven't checked out already, we have a bunch of videos and some of them describe a little bit of the nuances of what is an SCorp, what is an LLC, what is a CCorp, comparing them, etc. So we're going to cover a little bit of that today. We're going to talk about which one is applicable to you depending on the needs that you have, if you should use a U.S. company at all. And so, yeah, stick around to get the goods. Before we do that, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. Make sure you click the notification bell so you don't miss out on being notified about any of our videos. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you don't, please tell us in the comments. And if you're at all interested in international structuring, so where to form companies, how to lower your tax as low as legally possible, how to protect your assets, or where to open offshore bank accounts or help with opening offshore bank accounts and companies, getting residencies, citizenships, etc., please reach out to me. You can book a call, query.fm/Michael Rosmer. There's a link below. Or you can check out our websites, offshorecitizen.net and offshorecapitalist.com. All right, so for our purposes, for the purpose of simplification, we're going to talk about three main types of companies. I guess I should probably include a fourth. I guess we'll include the fourth. There are a few others aside from these. I'll briefly touch on them, but the reality is that these four are the ones you would commonly see in an international structuring or like just when you're setting up a US company. So what are they? Number one, you would have an LLC. I would say for foreigners, an LLC is probably the most common corporate form. There's some times where that's good. There's some times where that's bad. We're going to talk about that. Number two is a CCorp. Okay, again, good, bad, the ugly. You can check out our videos on these. Number three is an SCorp. We'll touch on that in a minute. Fourth is a partnership. Now there is something, for example, called a B Corp. A B Corp is a nonprofit, right? Doesn't apply to us. You can get into special purpose vehicles and all kinds of different things like that. We're not going to discuss any of that today. We're just going to focus on these four and say, hey, listen, which one is going to apply to you? So let's start off with the fact that unless you're an American, or at least an American tax resident, so a green card holder or whatever, you cannot hold an S-Corp. Okay, so S-Corps are only for Americans. Okay, if you're not an American, no S-Corp. Why would you want an S-Corp? An S-Corp tends to be great if you are a sole trader. Okay, so if it's just you and you're wanting to optimize yourself for payroll tax, etc., it tends to be the most efficient corporate form. Okay, so usually by default, I mentioned this in some previous videos, if you're going to set up a US company and you're an American and you're just one person, probably that should be your starting point. It doesn't necessarily always mean there's no one size fits all. It depends on the circumstances. I probably wouldn't use an S-Corp, for instance, for real estate investing, right? But for something where I'm going to be earning an income, there's kind of active trading, etc. For sure if it's just me, but even if I'm getting employees, etc., and I'm going to be earning kind of like an income from it, I would start by looking at an S-Corp, okay? Okay, foreigners can't do that one, so we're just going to put that aside. This brings us to the next two, which is a C-Corp and an LLC. Why would you want either one of these? So a C-Corp is always going to be taxable in the US, okay? Always, 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 which means you're paying, at this time that I'm making this video, 21% corporate tax. If there's state tax, you may have to deal with that as well. And so that's that. That's the situation. Now, we're going to come back because there actually may be times where that makes sense, okay? But in most cases, an LLC, if you're a foreigner, is going to be your default place to start looking, okay? Now, what about partnerships? A partnership, of course, typically comes in when you have two partners, surprise, surprise, although in theory you could have many partners, right? Usually, you would, very often at least, you have an LLC that's treated as a partnership, okay? Now there's going to be some consequences that mean that a partnership often is not a very good way to go for a foreigner. And the reason for that is that if you're in a situation that there's a bunch of partners and there's a distribution paid out from that partnership, it's all going to be considered US source income. It's going to be fully taxable in the US to you abroad, okay? Whereas if you had, let's say, a C-Corp, okay, the C-Corp earns money, it pays tax, it pays out a dividend to you, there will be withholding tax, but you will be able to get, under the tax treaty, a reduction in that withholding tax, okay? So very often that works out to being a more tax efficient method for you as the foreigner It doesn't for, say, local partners. Okay, so local partners might be screwed on that situation, but you know, that's and probably they're going to get their way as opposed to you. But anyway, what can you do? Next things. So typically speaking, if you're in an international tax situation, you're usually wanting some kind of deferral. Okay, what does this mean? This means that you want to be able to keep the money in the company without paying tax on it. That's a big part of the reason that you're doing this, okay? There's once in a while cases where you're, say, forced under the CFC rules to pay tax on it, but sometimes you can get a reduced rate, and so you're doing it for a reduced rate. Usually that's not the case. Usually we're looking for some kind of deferral, okay? Generally speaking, you cannot get some kind of deferral through a partnership. Usually partnership income is flowing back to the person who is the owner or the legal entity that's the owner, et cetera. And so it's going to be subject to tax immediately. So that's not really good. That's not so helpful for the people who are involved. Okay, so that's not going to be. It's just not helpful, right? So generally speaking, partnerships are not great for locals, for foreigners. Partnerships might be very useful for something like if you're going to do a real estate company locally, right? So you'd have a limited partnership, very common structure for, say, real estate development or something like that. Let's talk about C-Corps versus LLCs. Okay, so whether you want an LLC or not is going to have something to do with where you're going to pay tax, whether you're going to defer, and how the foreign country is going to treat the LLC, okay? If you have like US business, okay, so meaning that there's US operations, you're going to be subject to tax in the US, then as a foreigner, an LLC is probably not your best structure. Probably a C-Corp is going to be a better structure. If there's not business in the US, okay, so you're like, hey, listen, I'm running a drop shipping company, I have an Amazon business, I have, you know, Shopify store, I'm an affiliate, et cetera, but I have nothing to do with the US. I'm just setting up this company so I can access to payments infrastructure, access banking, you know, build clients, whatever. In those situations, an LLC is very often the optimal structure, but not always. Okay, why not? Let's say that you were an Australian. Well, the problem is that Australia treats an LLC by default as a pass-through entity, okay? So you don't get any deferral there. Now, in a lot of cases, if you're in places like Bulgaria, if you're in places like Malta, if you're in places like Portugal, if you're in a bunch of these places, there's no case law on it, and it's a bit of a mismatch, and you can usually get away with saying that it's a company and you can declare it as a dividend, which is usually better for you, okay? So in all those scenarios, usually there's certainly an arguable advantage to using an LLC over a C-Corp, okay? Because you're avoiding that level of tax and you're potentially gaining deferral, right? Very good. Now, the possible concern with that is, what if you're doing something like getting investors, right? Or what if you're in a situation where you're dealing with a country like Australia? Or, giving you guys kind of the whole gamut here, what if there's a mismatch between how the US taxes and how your home country taxes? I'm going to use Canada as an example here. In the case of Canada, Canada views an LLC all the time as a corporation. Okay, so distributions are paid as dividends when you choose to make them. From the US standpoint, that income flows straight through. Why is this a problem? This can be a problem because of the fact that your ability to carry forward and backward write-offs can be impeded. Okay, so basically you don't necessarily get the same ability to deal with that between Canada and the US, because they treat this entity differently, okay? So, for instance, if I was living in Canada, I'm not living in Canada, but say that I was, and I was investing in US real estate, it would be best for me to do that through a C-Corp. I might do like a land trust or something, that's a whole other conversation, but not through an LLC, okay? So, if you're investing, basically, when you're in situations where there may be actual US business, where there's actually income, there's actual write-offs, et cetera, very often, not always, but very often, the best option is a C-Corp. If you're in a situation where there isn't any of that, very often, not always, but very often, the best option is an LLC. The exceptions to where an LLC wouldn't be the best option is where the country that you're in is going to treat the LLC as a pass-through entity. Now that might still be okay if you have another entity that you can layer in between, right? So maybe you're like, okay, well, we have a Maltese company that owns the LLC, and the LLC is going to do its thing, and then, you know, wherever I am, you know, the Maltese company has whatever's going on there, and, you know, at some point in time, there's returns realized, and then, you know, it kind of provides this barrier, okay? So if that's the situation, great. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Is there local business? If there is local business, probably a C-Corp, not necessarily, but probably. If there's not, probably an LLC, except for in cases where it's going to be treated as a pass-through entity that would flow directly through to the immediate owner's country and cause problems. And then the last scenario that might be a factor for you is if you have investors, in particular US investors. Right now, the truth is that US investors often might not be looking just at the company, but also at where the people running the company are. And so they may require that they're based in the US. It depends. They're becoming more open to this as compared with when we were dealing with this 5 years ago or something like that. But it is worth considering that that could be a factor. So anyway, I hope that helps you. I hope it gives you some idea of like, okay, if I'm American, here's what I do. If I'm Canadian or somewhere abroad, I'm, you know, from Australia or New Zealand or, you know, Malta or Portugal or wherever, here's what I do. If I'm in the situation where I have US business, here's what I do. If I'm in a situation where I don't have US business, here's what I do. And if I'm in a situation where you know, I may have investors or other considerations, here's what I do. So anyway, I hope that helps. If you have questions about this, if it's not clear, I apologize. Please, you know, ask in the comments below, but also feel free to reach out to me. You can book a call about any of these issues, how to, you know, build your international structure, optimize your taxes, protect your assets, open bank accounts, get second residencies, citizenships, etc. You can do that by reaching out to me, clarity.fm/Michael Rosmer, link below, or check out our websites, offshorecitizen.net, offshorecapitalist.com, and smash the subscribe button, please. Click the notification bell, and if you like the video, please click the like button. I hope to see you guys very soon on the next video.